Okay, today we're going to look at what is on the ACT math test. The only way that we're going to be successful, the only way we're going to ace that test is if we know it inside and out. We know what to expect. It even helps if you've seen it before, and then we go from there. So let's take a look and let's break it down. On the ACT math test, there are 60 questions and you have 60 minutes. Every question is going to have 5 answer choices. So you have 1 minute per question. You're going to see some questions that you can answer in less than a minute if you know the math. That's going to give you more time to answer harder questions later, or to go back and recheck your answers, or follow up on questions that you weren't 100% sure about. So we want to make the best use of our time, which means we have to know going into it what we're going to see and what we want to spend our time on up front. Let's see. Of course, we know it's a math test, but what kind of math is going to be on it? That's what we need to know. This test is going to cover everything that you're learning in Algebra 1 geometry and Algebra 2. So everything from your high school career. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't take it if you're a sophomore? No. Or don't take it if you haven't taken Algebra 2? No. That means you want to get familiar with it. So take it as many times as you can. There may be some questions on it that you aren't prepared fully to answer, let's say if you haven't taken Algebra 2 yet, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to get great experience out of it and great learning from it. So if you look at this breakdown, more than half of the test comes from the essential things that you're learning in those 3 math classes throughout your high school career. The other half of it, or a little bit less than half of it, is applying those essentials to a situation. So if you think about math, most of the time, you learn a topic and then you answer questions about the topic. Then you move on to a new topic and you answer questions about that topic. And only usually once a year do you take a final exam where everything is on it and you have to remember and pick out things that you learned months ago. The ACT test is just like that. It's everything that you're learning in your entire high school math career, and you have to know when and where to use which thing. Okay, so it's important, number one, that you understand as we go into this ACT pathway, as we're preparing you for this test, we are assuming that you are learning the math in your math classes. What we are teaching you is what to do with it, how to use your time on the test, how to answer really common questions you're going to see on the test. And then, of course, we're going to hit on some of that math as well. The ACT has no formula sheet. Other tests like state tests, the SAT, they have formula sheets, but this test does not. They're going to expect you to know basic formulas like the area of a triangle, the area of a rectangle, etc. If you need it and it's not something basic, they're going to give it to you in the question. So for instance, if you're looking for the volume of a sphere, they're going to put the volume of a sphere formula in the question so you don't have to look for it. They want to know if you know how to use that formula. Okay, so focus on some of the basic things. And like I said, we'll get more into the math a little bit later. There are several different types of questions that you're going to see on the ACT. So we want to know before we get there which ones we want to spend our time on. There are easy questions, and no, I'm not talking about the math being easy. I'm just talking about the question type. It's going to ask you to do only one thing, or it's only going to cover one topic. It's going to be something that's short and sweet. Match the correct answer to this. Match the graph to the equation. It's going to ask you something, one thing at a time. Here's some examples. This is considered an easy question because they're asking you to match the solution to the graph. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Of course, you have to know how to do the math, but you can finish this in one step and then pick the correct graph. That's considered easy. Here's a geometry example. They want to know, what's the length of this side of the triangle? Well, in geometry, if you haven't already, you're going to learn the pattern for this special right triangle. And once you know that pattern, then you're going to be able to look at it, move some numbers around, and you're going to be able to pick the answer out correctly, sometimes without even using a calculator or doing any math, really, just by knowing what that rule is. Here's another example that comes from both Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. It's asking about probability. This one's considered a simple probability question because you can answer this question in one step. You don't need a calculator. You don't even have to do any math, really. And you're going to be able to pick your answer out correctly as long as you know about probability, which means you have to be paying attention in your math classes. You have to be scooping up as much information as you can, asking questions when you need it, so that later on when you come down the road, nobody has to remind you what probability is. Because if you have to think about it, you're losing time off of your 1 minute per question. Okay, next we have medium questions. This is going to generally ask you to do more than one thing. So maybe it's going to be a multi-step kind of equation. It might require you to use a combination of topics. So rather than just asking you to solve, it might ask you to solve and then to plug that solution into a formula, something like that. Here's some examples. Take the first question we saw. This one is medium because now it's asking you to match the graph to the solution of a harder equation. This one's going to take at least 2 steps because when you solve this equation, you're going to have to break it into 2 steps. Then when you solve it, you're going to look for the correct answer choice. So medium doesn't always mean harder. It just means that there's more to it. Same idea. This is exactly like the question that we saw before in the easy section. Only notice before we only had 1 triangle, and now we have basically 3 triangles, 2 triangles inside of a big triangle. But we're going to use the exact same formula. It's just going to require you to do it twice or in 2 steps. Another one also dealing with probability. Once again, it's not harder, it's just more than one thing. They're asking you about the probability of rain in city A and in city B, which means you're going to have to know and work with 2 different probabilities. So that's the difference between easy and medium. The next one is going to be challenging questions. It doesn't mean that it's always more steps. It might be pushing you out of your bubble. So it might be questions that you're used to seeing in math. We might ask it in a different way. We might ask you to do something different with the information. That's going to be a challenging question. If you look at this example, this is not hard. It's something that you should do in Algebra 2. However, it's asking it in a totally different way. Instead of just asking you which one is the graph of the equation, it's saying, here's the graph of this equation. Based on that, what do you think the equation is, or the graph is for an equation where I add in some absolute value bars? So we're just asking it in a different way. We're asking you to take a different approach. Okay, same with this next one. This one says, in the standard xy coordinate plane, a circle with center 6, 0 is tangent to the line y equals x. What's the area of the circle? So in this case, they didn't give you a picture. So you're going to have to draw a picture based on the information that they gave you. And once you do that, then you'll be able to find the area. But once again, they didn't give you an area formula. So that's another one. Remember, no formula sheet. They expect you to know the area of a circle on the ACT. Okay, last one in this challenging section. This one is considered challenging because it is asking you a question that could be answered in a million different ways. It's asking you how many different paths are there to get from K to L if all you're doing is going up and right. Okay, so if you think about it, you could sit on this question for a really long time thinking about all the different ways that you could go up and right in order to get from K to L. So that's what makes it challenging, is it's not just a straightforward where there's one answer. It's asking you, in this case, how many answers are there? Okay, another type of question is called a question in setting. This is oftentimes disguised as a real-world question. That means that they don't always tell you what kind of math you need. They're going to give you a question. You're going to have to decipher the question first and then solve it using the math that you know. So for this one, saying, we're looking at, she's riding her bike from her house to a friend's house and how far away they are. But when you look at the words, you don't automatically know how to set up the problem. So it's a question in setting, meaning you're going to have to first decipher it. So maybe in this case, draw a picture, then think about, okay, what math do I need? And then apply that math. A lot of times these are real life questions. This is another one like number 2. We're looking at what goes into a recipe. We're looking at a quarter of a pound and a fraction of the final, and that counts. Same thing. You don't automatically know what kind of math. Technically, this is more like 7th grade math, but you have to know what to do with the information that they give to you. This is a question in setting. The last type is called a question set. This is where they're going to give you one basic piece of information and then ask you 1, 2, maybe even 3 questions about that information. So it may have one question that's easy, one question that's medium, and one question that's hard, or it may have 2 medium questions. But a question set means you're going to have to know the information piece first. So here's an example. They're going to tell you about a graph of number of students enrolled in scripture classes based on each year and how many students there are. Now, the next 2 questions are going to answer or going to come from this information, which means you're going to have to refer back to it. One thing about this question type is do not let it scare you off. Because let's say you look at question number 1 and you don't know the answer to it, or you don't know how to find the answer to it. Question 1 might not be related to question 2 at all. So you may not know how to answer question 1, but you may know how to answer question 2. So don't let them scare you off just because of one being harder than the other. Okay, so each of them, they're going to ask you to refer back to that graph that you needed. Obviously, you have to know how to read a graph. Okay, in this ACT pathway, our goal is to cover all of the skills required for the ACT. All the things you need to know, we want you to see them in ACT form, not just in worksheet form, not just in Khan Academy form, but in ACT form, so you know what they're going to look like on the test. We are going to provide tons of examples of every question ranging from easy to challenging, questions in setting, question sets, and we want to give you a chance to practice where you're not on the timer, because that's the other part of it, is when you get to the test itself, you need to feel so confident in your ability to take the test that you can just focus on using your time wisely. Do not ever give up. Like we talked about earlier, remember, you can take the test more than once. We want you to take it more than once because that's where people are shown to get the highest scores. It says the average student takes the ACT 3 times to see the most improvement. If you think about it, take it once as a freshman, once as a sophomore, once as a junior. You can even take it again as a senior if you're using it to get into colleges. So do not ever give up. Use what you have.